tie that we have here. But I'd like to welcome you. Once you're finished, then any questions that we have for all of the justices and judges will be welcome. So welcome, Christine. We can't wait till we have you here in person, but it's awesome that you're Zooming in with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It really is such a pleasure, and I wish I could be there. What a beautiful location you're in. It's just terrific. Well, let me start by saying, thank you for letting me visit with you by Zoom. And let me fill in the Bedford County connection for you. My sister-in-law is Ann Lewis. And so that allows you to know that I am also Irish by former marriage, because Ann is married to my brother, Steve Lewis. Ann has known me probably as long as anyone else in life. And, you know, frankly, she's not just my sister-in-law. She's one of my dearest friends. So hello, Ann. It's so nice to have you see me, but not be able to see you. There she is. So let me, Mike Wojcik did such a fabulous job explaining what the courts are about and, why we're here speaking with you. This is early. I mean, obviously, we're taking your time during the primary to just remind you of what's going to be happening in November, because obviously we won't be on the ballot until the general election. And to boot, we'll be right at the bottom of the ballot. As far down on the ballot as you could go will be the retention election judges and justices. And so, number one, we want just to remind you that this is going to be happening. And number two, this is a very important election. Let me just give you a little bit of background. When David Wecht, Kevin Dougherty, and I were elected in 2015, A, it was because of the hard work of all of you, and B, it really was not a very close election. We did have bipartisan support, but we were coming on to a Supreme Court that had been really in disarray for a number of years. You may recall there were scandals regarding emails. There were arguments that went public between members of the court. And it really was just not a good situation. And so one of the things that the three of us wanted to do was to be certain that in serving you, we did everything we could possibly do to bring back the integrity to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that it deserves. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court is the oldest Supreme Court in North America. We had our 300th anniversary last year. And so the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania deserves to be served with integrity. And so that's what our effort was. And I don't know, I guess I can say this on my own. We have served with integrity. The entire court does. I mean, we have members of our court who were elected as Republicans. Our court is extremely collegial and we serve well together. And I'm really proud to say that our jurisprudence is respected throughout the United States. In any other year, there would be nothing that would suggest that there was going to be any real question about whether or not David Wecht, Kevin Dougherty, and Christine Donohue would be retained, because retention elections are essentially low interest. And there's a good reason for that. If you don't hear about us in a negative personal way, if you don't hear negative things about the conduct of the Supreme Court, you could be pretty well assured that we are serving you well. And as I said, we have. But as Judge Wojcik explained, there is some sense out there that this year it will be possible to essentially knock off of the court for no good reason the three justices and two of our very fine intermediate appellate court judges. apparently for no other reason that when we were elected to the court in the first instance, we were elected as Democrats. I'm going to tell you that that is not a reason to vote no in a retention election. What you look for in a retention election is what our rulings, what our opinions, what they have done. And I'm just going to point out a couple to you because I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbors. And many of your neighbors are not of the same party as you are, as we well know. And I'm going to ask you, when they say, why should we vote yes for these people? Let me give you a couple of examples. While we've been on the court, and that's David Wecht, Kevin Dougherty, Christine Donohue, we have really looked to the Pennsylvania Constitution to determine whether or not you as Pennsylvanians have rights under that Constitution that are different from, and in some cases, stronger than under the United States Constitution. Let me give you a couple of examples. The Pennsylvania Constitution has a clause that requires that public school education shall be open to all. Now, that sounds actually like, well, of course it would be, but you know that's not true. Because depending on the school district in which your child is raised, their education may not be equal to the education of a child who is being raised in a more affluent school district. And so while we have been on the bench, our court decided that the manner in which schools are funded in Pennsylvania, which is at the local level, could be challenged in the Commonwealth Court. And of course, a lawsuit was brought. And you've heard about what's been happening with that. You've heard about the efforts that the legislature has been trying to make to better fund public education so that there could be more equality between kids who grew up in poor school districts and kids who grew up in rich school districts. That is not a partisan decision. That is a decision that goes to the heart of the rights of citizens of Pennsylvania, guaranteed by our Constitution. Another example, and this one you have heard more about than you probably ever care to, and that is the mail-in voting law, Act 77. By the time that David Wecht, Kevin Dougherty, and I were on the court for maybe 4 years, that act had been challenged at least 4 times. The constitutionality of that act had been challenged at least 4 times. And you know what the nub of the problem was? People were voting by mail, and it was convenient to vote by mail. Well, the problem is that's not a constitutional problem. When you look at a statute to see whether or not it meets our Constitution, you have to look to see whether or not it violates another tenet of our Constitution, which is the Free and Fair Elections Clause. And we determined resoundingly that it did not violate the Free and Fair Election Clause. In fact, it enforced people's right to vote. Act 77, the mail-in voting law, that was enacted so that men and women who work shift jobs could get to the polling places when they were open. It was enacted so that people who are sick or old or disabled have a way to vote when otherwise they would not be able to get to the polls. That is not a partisan decision. That is not a partisan act. That is an act that goes to the heart of making sure that people have the right to franchise. So when you hear, and I think you probably will hear, that you should vote no, we need to clean this house, this is just not based in any fact or law or any good reason. Because I can assure you that when we rule, it is based on the statutes and on the Constitution. And for those reasons alone, you should feel very comfortable saying to your neighbors, as my dog just said, vote yes. Vote yes for the justices and judges who are running for retention. I thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity to speak with all of you. And I look forward to seeing you because I know you guys have a lot of activities. I know all about them from Ann. I have one of the cookbooks that your group sold. Good cookbook, like it a lot. So thank you so much and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Christine.
My pleasure.
Do you have a few minutes if there's any questions? Do we have any, raise your hands. I don't know if we have questions for any of the, Dave has a question. I know.
So you had mentioned at State Committee a couple different examples in addition to what you just explained. Could you elaborate on some of the other major decisions that the court has done that have guaranteed Pennsylvanians more rights than the U.S. Constitution?
Well, I mean, let's talk about, again, the free and fair election clause. And this is a big deal. And I'm going to tell you why it's a big deal. Our court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, was really the court in the late teens that brought this notion of free and fair elections to the forefront. A challenge was brought to our court, and actually it started in Judge Wojcik's court, the Commonwealth Court, challenging the way that congressional districts were drawn in Pennsylvania. And as you'll recall, every 10 years there's a census, and then every 10 years congressional districts are redrawn. And the idea of having congressional districts is so that people within each of those districts have an opportunity to express their vote. Okay, well, stop there. The challenge that was brought to our court on the way in which those congressional districts were drawn in 2010 was because districts were drawn in such a way that they were literally laughable. In fact, nationally, we had a congressional district in Pennsylvania that was referred to Daffy Duck, and another one that looked like Donald Duck. And so, this is not how districts are supposed to be drawn. They're supposed to be drawn so that every person who casts a vote has an equal chance of that vote being counted as their neighbor in that district. And so those districts were challenged, brought to our court. We actually gave the legislature the opportunity to attempt to redraw them. They did not do that. And so it came to us to take a stab at it, and we did. And the districts that we drew resulted in the first time they were used, 9 Democrats were elected and 9 Republicans were elected. And let me ask you this question. What else would you expect in a state like Pennsylvania? It is equally divided. It is purple. Sometimes it's bluer, sometimes it's redder. But you would expect close to a 9-9 split. Prior to that redrawing, there were 13 Republican congressmen and women, and there were 5 Democrats. That is not Pennsylvania. And that is not an opportunity to have a free and fair election. And so, once again, based upon that precept that our Constitution guarantees those kinds of rights, that's what happened with the congressional redistricting. That has been called a partisan decision. I ask you, is it partisan to have a congressional component that is split equally between Democrats and Republicans? And let me tell you how this works, because when districts are drawn fairly in a state like Pennsylvania, there are going to be districts that are called swing districts. And that means literally in any given election, they can go either way. Now, the second election after the redrawing of the maps, 3 of the swing districts went to a Democratic candidate. Do you know what happened last year? 2 of those swing districts went to Republican candidates. And that, my friends, is why they're called swing districts. And that is why they are fairly drawn districts. Pennsylvania is now looked at as a model in what congressional districts should look like. Another thing we did have the opportunity to do during our tenure, there was reapportionment in Pennsylvania. So there's redistricting at the federal level, and that's when congressional districts are drawn. And then there are state House and Senate districts that are also redrawn every 10 years, and that's called reapportionment as opposed to redistricting. Well, as our Constitution works, when that reapportionment commission is put together, it is 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and that's because it's a majority and minority leader of the House and Senate, so it's always going to be 2 and 2. And then if those 4 people can't elect a 5th person, it goes to the Supreme Court to make the 5th appointment. Those 2 people never pick a 5th person. And so it came to the Supreme Court, and we appointed the 5th person, who is the former president of the University of Pittsburgh, former dean of the University Pittsburgh School of Law, and hardly a partisan. But after that commission met and challenges were made to the manner in which the old legislative districts were drawn, it turned out this time around, the Democrats took the House by a very, very slim margin, which I might say again is to be expected. But that was the first time that happened in a decade. And so, this notion of not only people voting, but really having an opportunity for their vote to count is a very important precept in our Commonwealth. And albeit it should be a very important precept in the United States of America. We are very, very lucky to have a Constitution that we have in Pennsylvania that, frankly, the Pennsylvania Constitution is older than the United States Constitution. As a matter of fact, it served as a model for the United States Constitution, not vice versa. But we still have many of these types of provisions in our charter that are different than and stronger than the United States Constitution. So, I want you to realize, and I hope that you could share with your neighbors that what we are doing as a court is making certain that we are following the law and we are following the Constitution.
Thank you.
Justice Donohue, it's my pleasure here. Just if you could, would you like to explain also one of my favorite cases that's going on right now? It's an incredibly important case. And I know you agree with me on this. Allegheny reproductive health.
I can address it only to the extent that we have already written an opinion in that case. And I won't go any farther than that because that case is going to come back up to my court. But the Pennsylvania Constitution has a very, very special amendment that the United States Constitution has never, ever been amended to include, and it is called the Equal Rights Amendment. And it assures that there will not be discrimination based upon the sex of an individual in Pennsylvania, period. And that amendment was enacted back in the late 1970s when the move was on to amend the United States Constitution. That didn't happen. Pennsylvania was the first state to adopt an equal rights amendment. We have a very, very proud constitutional history. And so when a challenge was brought to the Medicaid statute, based upon the fact that certain abortions, and these aren't only quote unquote elective abortions. Under the Medicaid Act, there are a lot of therapeutic abortions that won't be paid for under our Medicaid Act, and it was challenged under the Equal Rights Amendment on the theory that if the legislature is going to allow health benefits to men, including all kinds of health benefits that have to do with reproduction, then it has to also provide the same kinds of health benefits to women under the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, we decided that principle. And we decided in our written opinion that's been out there for about a year now, we made it absolutely clear that this is a very, very strong right in Pennsylvania. But what we did, and we decide the law, we sent it back to the Commonwealth Court so that they could determine whether or not there were any significant, important, and overriding state interests that would somehow erase that particular right to equal health treatment under these circumstances. So I thank Mike for reminding me of that. The Equal Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania is a big deal. And once again, because of our writing in this Allegheny Health Network case, many states are looking at the provision of health services, including reproductive health services to women, in terms of discrimination when it is denied. So, the other thing, I'll just mention it, and we also have in Pennsylvania and another incredible amendment that most state constitutions don't have, and that is the amendment that provides that we need to have quality in our air and in our water and in our environment. The Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania is an incredibly strong document that, when it was enacted right about the time that acid mine drainage was essentially making it possible for people all over Pennsylvania to drink the water that was coming from its streams. And I will tell you, my dad was a coal miner. And so the notion of coal mining and the environmental damage that it did was, something that was noticed immediately by the legislature. And so they asked the citizens of the Commonwealth to decide whether or not they wanted to have an amendment that protected the environment. And so we have an Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania, which our court, the Supreme Court, David Weck, Kevin Doherty, and I have been on it. We've probably decided a half dozen important cases attempting to enforce that constitutional amendment in a manner that's balanced with other needs in this Commonwealth. So, I can only tell you that we have been working very hard on behalf of the citizens of Pennsylvania to be certain that our Constitution does right by you, because it is a beautiful charter, and it is one that we should all be very proud of. And David Weck, Kevin Doherty, and I hope to continue to serve you so that we can protect and enforce those rights.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question, Cheryl.
I got a call late last night from someone I'm a committee person, someone in my district, who wanted to know what was the number of polling election offices that were shut down because of the bomb threats. He had heard it was 62 or 32. And also, is it true that there is institutionally within the structure of the administration of the government in Pennsylvania, an investigation going on about whether there is any electronic, any untoward behavior electronically while those polling places, election offices were vacated?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Judge Wojcik, did your court deal with any of those interruptions during the last election? And do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, those were mostly handled with the court's common pleas. Memory serves, there were about 30 that were impacted. They were never shut down, but they were delayed. They evacuated a few of them, but then once they cleared it, they were able to get back to voting. Now, the other question you had is there any electronic surveillance? That has been suggested that there was some infiltration of the systems. And that literally has been going on for 20 years since we went from the old system after HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, after the 2000 election. Let me assure you, I see a lot of these cases as a judge because we get them in the first instance. We just had an argument in the second week of February about the it was at Eastern County where they had trouble with the programming. They were alleging that there was a defect and someone drilled into the systems. Our election systems are incredibly safe. The reason they're incredibly safe is it's decentralized. It's not a state issue. The Commonwealth does not run our elections. The counties run the elections. Now, I can speak from personal experience. I was county solicitor in Allegheny County. I worked on the transition from the old lever machines to electronic voting machines. And we had folks saying, well, those are on the internet. Anyone can dial in from anywhere. They are not. Every voting machine that you see out there is what's called air-gapped. So there is no connection to the internet at all. That's physical media that they take to collect the votes, and they take them to central repository or warehouse in Allegheny where they're carried. So, you know, I can't speak to Bedford County, I can't speak to other counties, but I know personally, number one, from my experience working as county solicitor in Allegheny and then reviewing cases, I have another personal experience with the way Allegheny County is run. My daughter works for the county and they, you know, surprise, surprise, recruit her every year to help with the elections. And I always ask her any irregularities, and she says, people complain about all the time, we do our audits, we run through. Nothing.
Thank you. Good to know.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think we're pretty good. Any other questions? What a remarkable afternoon. We learned a lot, didn't we?
Yeah.
And now you see why we were so excited to introduce you all to these candidates. And with that, we're going to turn it over a little bit to some petition signing.